Hello, and welcome to Conscious Curiosities, where we unlock the wisdom of the universe which lies within us. I'm Maria Luz, your host, a certified hypnotist, astrologer, and psychic medium. Today's episode is Pluto in Aquarius, Part 2. And on today's episode, I will talk about the Pluto impacts to your birth chart, and then I will summarize Pluto in Aquarius throughout history. Last week, I summarized Aquarius's energy, and this week, I offer insight into the synthesis of the energies of the planet Pluto plus the sign of Aquarius. And as Pluto greatly impacts world history, I thought it would be useful to summarize the episode of the astrology podcast that I mentioned last week. I know this is kind of meta, a podcast within a podcast. But it's 4 hours long. So that information was so good, but I realize it's intimidating to sit down and watch 4 hours of content. So I've just pulled out the summary for you here, and I hope it's helpful. And I'll get to that in the second part. And the reason why I think it's important to spread that information around is that there are consistent threads of themes which have built upon one another across the Pluto and Aquarius time periods. And remember, because of Pluto's orbit, those are about 250 years apart. So, the episode, as I mentioned, was 4 hours long. It was thoroughly researched and it covers from 674 BCE to the most recent ingresses of Pluto into Aquarius. So, I will give all that information and you won't just have to take my word for it that Pluto changing signs from Capricorn to Aquarius is a huge deal. But first, I will put aside the global and historical impacts and discuss personal impacts because depending on your birth chart, you may have already been feeling the influence of Pluto changing signs. Remember, Pluto transforms intensely, especially if Pluto is making a significant transit to a planet in your chart or to your ascendant or midheaven. As the teacher explained with regard to major transits, Pluto approaches you from the underworld and will keep you on a meat hook until you agree to give up something you think you cannot live without. And what follows that time is an uncomfortable waiting period. Once you've made your negotiations with Pluto and until you're free to rise back up from that underworld and in your transformed state. And as Pluto has been making a square to my ascendant, I have experienced this Pluto ride firsthand. As you will see in the Pluto and Aquarius in history segment, Pluto cycles build upon one another to continue the evolution via these transformative periods. And I did a little research on my own chart and noticed that Pluto made a conjunction to my ascendant going back and forth over this area from the time I was 11 years old to 13 years old. And during this time, I was bullied due to my biracial identity. And soon after, I discovered alcohol as a way to solve my feelings of low self worth and identity confusion. To sum up this transformation, it was from innocent child to traumatized teen. I gave up my innocence and I gained self sufficiency and an understanding that the world was not always kind, which was a shock to my Leo sun, but necessary to get through life. And in an echo, as I mentioned, Pluto started forming this square to my ascendant. So, again, back then, in 1981 to 83, it was conjunct, and now, in starting in 2021, it started forming a square, and it's still ongoing. In fact, it'll be exact on the day I release this episode. So, at that time in early 2021, I had a relapse from sobriety. And I was again struggling with fitting into the identity I found myself in. In the time Pluto has been going back and forth over my ascendant in that square aspect this time, I have given up not only alcohol for good, but my contrived identity as well. Pluto seeks absolute truth, and often the only way to arrive at that truth is through absolute vulnerability. To sum up this transformation, I gave up alcohol as a secret crutch. And Pluto is all about the secrets as well, um, as well as giving up my need for external approval. And what I gained in return was self trust and the ability to protect myself and thrive rather than simply to numb out and force myself to do things that do not feel aligned. Externally, my career and the people I surround myself with have transformed my day to day existence completely. Pluto moves so slowly, these major transits take a few years, as you can see by just those two examples I gave you. And because Pluto aspected my ascendant, the transformation had to involve my very identity. If you remember, the ascendant is all about you and why you came into being in this world. So my transit may have been extra dramatic because Pluto is my chart ruler as the modern ruler of Scorpio, and I'm a Scorpio 0 degree rising. And I have Jupiter exactly conjunct my ascendant, also at 0 degree Scorpio, but in the 12th house, just 5 minutes behind my ascendant. And as you may remember, Jupiter expands everything. So, if, for example, Pluto is aspecting your midheaven, it would impact your public persona, your vocation, or your status. Those are the things that the midheaven is associated with. And with aspects to natal planets, you would consider the area of life that planet manages in your life. For example, if Pluto is aspecting your natal Venus, possibly a significant relationship or your personal finances will transform. And note that transits can light up your chart like a Christmas tree because they impact not only that planet that they aspect, not only the planet that Pluto is aspecting, but any planets or angles in aspect to that initial planet Pluto aspected, much like dominoes. You can also expect the house or the houses where Aquarius sits in your chart to transform over the next 19 years, even if you don't have Pluto making an aspect to any individual planet or angle in your chart. So think back from 2008 to the present about which aspect of yourself or your life has transformed the most, or where you may have given up something that you previously thought you couldn't live without. And that will likely be where the sign of Capricorn resides in your chart, where Pluto has transited over the last 16 years. And for a refresher on what the houses signify, you can review that podcast episode. I'll put the link in the show notes, or I'll also put links to the Substack posts that I have on houses and the reference tool I created. So now I'm going to move on to Pluto and Aquarius throughout history. And what follows is from the Astrology podcast, which is hosted by Chris Brennan. And in this episode, the guest was Nick Dagan Best. And the episode was called Pluto in Aquarius in History. And it aired on January 13th, 2024. So first, I'm going to list out the themes that they saw through the periods of Pluto and Aquarius, including those recent ingresses in 2023 and 2024. And then I will actually go through each of the time periods that were, again, about 250 years apart. So the themes are the power of technology, knowledge, and information, utilization of technological advances for power and control, vast repositories of information under control of centralized authorities, how developments of technology can shape society in ways such as the technologies of paper, gunpowder, the printing press, the cotton gin, and there are some more that they name. Technological transfer from foreign cultures has transformative impact on society, politics, and power. What it means to be alien or foreign, the recognition of sentience in non-humans, discovery of life outside of Earth. Foundations are set for something which grows in future Pluto and Aquarius periods. Scientists creating for the love of science, but not considering the ethics which arise as a result. Refining of scientific method, shifts in intellectual and societal trends, what is acceptable and what is not. espionage, utilization and attitudes on astrology, tensions between autocracy and democracy, tensions with globalization and trade, themes which include China's role in history, cataclysmic events which cause major shift in social trends, uprisings to power, aviation and flight, augmentation of human abilities, the line in time that's forming from pre-AI and post-AI influenced documents, etc. Government controlling the flow of information and or technology, for example, institutionalized censorship or monopolies on technology until it cannot be suppressed any longer. Innovations maturing, such as drones. Also, they mentioned the Uranus in Gemini ingress, which happens July 7th, 2025, and that this will create a synergy for anything that's on the Pluto in Aquarius agenda, because, of course, it's moving towards an air trine. So, going through the different periods, starting with 674 to 647 BCE. As a state supported endeavor, 10 colleges of astrologers were set up around Mesopotamia and their observations were compiled. They recognized the value as a technology to be used to plan state affairs and also the detriment of restricting it from the general population, or in the case of some rulers, not the detriment, but the actual strategic advantage to maintaining the power of the technology of astrology in state hands. So in 430 to 404 BCE, the next Pluto in Aquarius, natal astrology was developed as another technology to forecast how an individual's life would unfold, versus for only the mundane events that the state astrologers were practicing. The oldest birth chart is dated April 29th, 410 BCE, with Pluto at 24 degrees Aquarius. The Persian Empire took over Mesopotamia, and the Persian rulers may not have put as much emphasis on the imperial use of astrology, perhaps moving towards a democratization of this technology. And the ephemerides were developed. Those are the tracking of the movements of the planets. 185 to 160 BCE, Hellenistic astrology was developed, which became the basis of Western astrology and included the fourfold system of planets, signs, houses, aspects. And paper was invented. The oldest paper fragment from China dates to 179 to 141 BCE. And just as an aside, we don't often now think of paper as a technology, but it certainly was. And there were also increased connections between China and Western cultures, and the Silk Road came shortly after this period. And that was the major trade route, of course. And then in 60 to 85 CE, Romans became aware of the true nature of silk, that the Chinese were maintaining a monopoly of silkworms. Prior to that, they thought, based on what the Chinese were telling them, that there was some kind of special trees that only grew in China, that's where silk came from. So 70% of Rome burned in 64 CE. This was 2 days after a lunar eclipse and also a Mars-Neptune conjunction. And there were suspicions that Nero started the fire so he could rebuild the city to his preference. There was a Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire, which led to the diaspora and the dissemination of Judaism across the world. There was also a Pluto and Uranus conjunction at this time. In 305 to 329 CE, Constantine becomes head of the Roman Empire after the civil war following his father's death. Again, this was another solar eclipse around this time. 2 days happened 2 days prior. And in 313 CE, Constantine legalizes Christianity. This was done via the Edict of Milan, which was really a series or a bunch of letters that were sent to various governors. The first Council of Nicaea was in 325 CE, and at this time, Jupiter, Pluto, and Uranus were all in Aquarius. And what that did was establish Christian Orthodox beliefs and also state what was outside of those beliefs. They decided where the city of Constantinople would be built, and the attitudes and laws began turning against astrology as Christianity started taking hold and power. And not long after this, it became illegal to practice astrology. In 550 to 574 CE, Byzantine based Roman Emperor Justinian sends spies to steal silkworms from China. Silk was extremely valuable as a commodity, and the Roman Empire wanted to have an advantage over its rival, Persia. There was then a state run monopoly on silk production set up in the Roman Empire. In 795 to 819 CE, paper moves from China to the Arabic and Islamic empires, enabling books and libraries. The House of Wisdom was founded in Baghdad, and this is where there were texts being translated into Arabic from other languages, which led to a lot of science, cultural, and intellectual discoveries and activities. Charlemagne was named the first Holy Roman Emperor, crowned by Pope Leo X. There was an alliance now between secular and religious powers to dominate populations. The first confirmed reference to gunpowder in a Chinese text was in 808 CE. Next period was 1041 to 1063 CE. Paper starts production in Europe, which at that point was in Spain, part of the Islamic Empire. Then there was centralized production of gunpowder for the Chinese military. And soon after this period, China forbade the sale of saltpeter, which is an ingredient in gunpowder, to foreigners. In 1286 to 1308 CE, there were now innovations made to paper production in Italy. And just before this time period, recipes for gunpowder started appearing in Europe. Guns and cannons came into wide use in China, which changed strategies for war and who has the power. The Mongol Empire peaked, and Marco Polo travels the Silk Road and records his travels, and those are published so others can read about it. Francis Bacon's work established the basis for the scientific method. Moving on to 1532 to 1553 CE, there was the spread of the printing press, which was invented just prior to this period. And this led to the proliferation of books and the spread of ideas and knowledge. Just after this period, Copernicus published On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres, which showed the sun as the center of the universe. There was a major book on human anatomy published, which allowed scientific and medical advancements based on biology. There was institutionalized censorship. For example, the Senate of Milan created a list of prohibited books. The Protestant Reformation began just prior to this period, and the Spanish conquest of the Incan Empire and the destruction of that culture occurred, as well as other conquistador activities in North America. Tycho Brahe, who has a very Aquarian chart, they pointed out, builds on Copernicus's work and creates these observational tables that later on Kepler and other astronomers would be able to use to more accurately determine the position of planets. And this creates a modern link between evidence and theory that is now the basis of Western science. The science of ballistics was also developed. And then moving on to the last Pluto and Aquarius period, which was 1777 to 1798 CE, William Herschel discovered Uranus using the new technology of the telescope. There were breaks from monarchies, for example, the one we all know about, the American Revolution, which continued on until 783, and the French Revolution, which covered 1789 to 1799. There was also this reign of terror in France, where accusations of the enemies of state were sent to the guillotine. Also at this time, Uranus pops in there, as this time in an opposition to Pluto. And again, I mentioned that grand trine, which is going to form, so that's what's important to keep Uranus in the back of our heads here. The democracy was set up in the US with checks and balances to protect citizens' rights. There was also a Haitian Revolution, which was the first uprising of enslaved people to their enslavers. Uh, Jenner developed the first vaccine, which was for smallpox. And there were a lot of inventions: the continuous electric current, the steam engine, textile technologies, the cotton gin, and the first successful hot air balloon flight technology. The technology for that was developed by the Montgolfier brothers in France. This was in 1783. And Mary Shelley, who was author of Frankenstein, was born with Pluto at 29 degrees Aquarius, conjunct her midheaven, in 1797. And this was brought up, even though it was the very end of that period, because this novel is considered by many the first science fiction novel, and it holds many of the themes that are consistent with Aquarius and with Pluto, such as needs that drive innovation, exile from groups, rebelling, the ethics of technological creations. And then most recently, there were a few periods of Pluto in Aquarius from March 23rd, 2023 to June 11th, 2023. And then again from January 20th, 2024 to September 1st, 2024. And then I believe the day I release this episode, if I do it early, will be on November 19th, 2024. And that will be when Pluto is in Aquarius now. No more dipping back into Capricorn until it leaves for Pisces in 2044. Um, I will put the resources and the references in the show notes. And I hope this now leaves you empowered to be consciously curious about Pluto in your birth chart, and specifically Pluto in Aquarius. If you like this podcast, please share it. Please leave a review. Also, check me out over on Substack. That's where I post all of my companion written pieces. It's also really easy now on my Substack to go ahead and book if you would like to do an astrology consultation or an inspired guidance session where I combine astrology and mediumship and psychic clair information. And I also offer hypnosis as well. And that's about it. I thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye bye.